It was supposed to be the perfect getaway, the anniversary trip every couple dreams of. A quiet, secluded cabin tucked away in the dense woods, miles from the hustle of their everyday lives. Just the two of them. No distractions. No interruptions. It should have been a sanctuary. But what happens when paradise becomes a kill zone? The story begins with Jasmine and Marcus, two people whose love story seemed destined for a fairy tale ending. They met in college, united by a shared dream of success, a mutual love for travel, and the kind of chemistry that made outsiders think they were inseparable. Their love was the kind people envied, built on trust, laughter, and promises of forever. They had been together for over a decade, and after a quiet proposal on a warm summer evening, they made their vows. For better or worse, Jasmine whispered as she gazed into Marcus's eyes on their wedding day. But anniversaries, in the end, aren't just about celebrating the good times. For some couples, they become the final moment before the unraveling begins. Before we begin, like this video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more intriguing stories. Now let's begin. As they drove down the winding road to their destination, the sky was a muted gray, casting an ominous haze over the trees. Marcus was at the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. Jasmine sat beside him, her fingers nervously tapping against her leg. The silence in the car was palpable, as if the world outside had been swallowed up by the very woods that loomed ahead. "Are you okay?" Jasmine asked softly, her voice a gentle whisper in the vast emptiness of the car. She glanced at Marcus, noting the tension in his shoulders. It wasn't the usual relaxed demeanor he exuded. "I'm fine," he replied quickly. But there was a hesitation in his voice that unsettled her. His eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, his hand shifting the gear stick. It was an odd movement, something small, unnoticeable to most, but not to Jasmine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the pressure of this milestone anniversary, or maybe it was the distance between them that had grown too large to ignore. But something about this trip didn't feel right. As the car rumbled down the dirt road, the trees became more densely packed, their twisted branches blocking out the light. It was as if the forest was closing in around them, a suffocating silence hanging over them. Marcus didn't speak for the rest of the drive. His focus on the road seemed unnerving now, like a man trying to outrun something. They reached the cabin just before sunset. It was the picture of rustic charm: log walls, large windows that looked out into the forest, and a small porch with a rocking chair that creaked in the wind. But for Jasmine, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Inside, the cabin was cold, but not just from the lack of warmth. There was a palpable chill in the air, a sense of something ancient and unsettling, waiting just beyond the threshold. As Marcus unloaded their bags from the car, Jasmine made her way to the back window. She looked out over the sprawling wilderness that stretched as far as the eye could see. The trees were tall and dark, shadows creeping in as the sun dipped lower in the sky. She heard the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the wind, but there was something else, too. A faint rustling behind her, soft and subtle. She spun around, but there was nothing there. That night, as the darkness outside deepened, Jasmine and Marcus settled in for a quiet dinner. The cabin was peaceful, but it felt as though the walls were closing in, pressing in on them both. As they sat across from each other at the small wooden table, Jasmine tried to force a smile, to push past the gnawing feeling in her gut. "So," Marcus began, his voice stiff, as he pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate, "what do you think about the place?" Jasmine hesitated. "It's nice," she said carefully. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on the old fireplace, where a crackling fire burned. She noticed the glint of a blade in the firelight, a carving knife resting just behind the dinner plates. She had seen that knife before. She was sure of it. It had been part of the set they had bought on their honeymoon. Suddenly, she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her, and she blinked hard to clear the fog in her mind. There was something that didn't belong here. She set down her fork. "Marcus," she said slowly, her voice trembling ever so slightly, "is everything okay? You're acting a little off." He didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered to the floor, his expression unreadable. And then, almost too casually, he spoke. "I'm just tired," he muttered, his tone flat. "It's been a long year." Jasmine frowned. That wasn't like Marcus. She knew him better than that. The tension between them was growing thicker, and the room felt smaller with each passing second. As Marcus looked away, his hand reached for his glass of wine, but his grip was shaky. His hand trembled, just as Jasmine opened her mouth to ask another question. A loud thud echoed from somewhere outside the cabin, followed by the distinct sound of something, or someone, scraping against the walls. The noise was faint, but the silence that followed was even more deafening. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't react. His expression remained vacant. Jasmine's heart began to pound in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Something was terribly wrong. As the evening wore on, Jasmine began to sense that they were no longer alone in the woods. But who was watching them? And more importantly, what did Marcus know that he wasn't telling her? The night was long, punctuated only by the sound of wind rattling against the cabin's windows. Jasmine lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling above her. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the silence, and each breath Marcus took beside her felt distant cold. The tension between them felt suffocating, like the very walls of the cabin were closing in. She had tried to sleep. She really had. But the sound of that strange thud outside had shaken her, gnawing at her mind. What had it been? A branch breaking? An animal? Or was it something, or someone, waiting for them in the dark? She rolled over, glancing at Marcus. His back was turned toward her, his breathing steady and rhythmic. But there was something unsettling about the way his body was positioned, as if he were bracing for something, waiting. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, only to find it dead. The screen, black and lifeless, offered no answers. She tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine, but the air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing against her chest. Was this how the perfect getaway was supposed to feel? As the hours passed, Jasmine couldn't escape the feeling that the trip had taken a wrong turn. Every moment, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to speak of something darker, something buried beneath the surface. And Marcus, her husband, who had once been her rock, now seemed like a stranger. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Marcus was already awake, brewing the rich aroma in the small kitchen. The sun had barely crept over the horizon, casting a soft light through the cabin's windows. But it wasn't enough to chase away the shadows hanging over her. "Good morning," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jasmine forced a smile in return, but it felt strained, as if the weight of the night before was still clinging to her. She watched Marcus as he moved about the cabin, his movements mechanical, deliberate, like a man stuck in a routine he could no longer break free from. There was an eerie stillness to him now, something cold and calculated. "Did you hear anything last night?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Marcus paused, his back to her as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. His hands trembled slightly, though he seemed to try to mask it. "No, just the wind," he replied, his voice flat. Jasmine's gaze lingered on his back, on the tension in his shoulders. He was lying. She knew it. There was no wind, no storm, nothing that could explain the noise she had heard. And yet, Marcus was dismissing it as though it didn't matter. The thought gnawed at her, and the more she watched him, the more the feeling of dread took root in her gut. She needed to know the truth. But how? After breakfast, they decided to take a walk through the woods, something that was supposed to bring them closer. The crisp air stung her lungs, and as they walked side by side, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to close in around them, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. "Marcus," Jasmine said after a long silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "What really happened last night? Who was out there?" He didn't respond right away. Instead, he kept his gaze forward, his jaw clenched, as though he was fighting a battle with himself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "It was nothing," he said, his voice tight. "You're imagining things. There's no one out here but us." Jasmine's pulse quickened, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Imagine things? She knew what she had heard. She knew what she had felt. There was something in the woods. Something waiting. But Marcus wasn't saying anything else. His words were like a wall, blocking her from the truth. And that wall, impenetrable, solid, was all she could see now. The man she had once trusted had become a stranger. They continued their walk in silence, the sounds of their footsteps muffled by the soft dirt trail beneath them. Jasmine's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling as she tried to piece together the puzzle. Why was Marcus acting so distant? Why wasn't he answering her questions? Then, as they rounded a bend in the path, something caught Jasmine's eye. It was a dark shape, lying partially hidden among the underbrush. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a piece of cloth, a torn, weathered shirt, streaked with something red. "Marcus, look!" she exclaimed, her voice shaking as she stepped forward. But before she could reach it, Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her back roughly. "No," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're leaving. Now." The force of his grip made her stumble, and for a moment, she found herself speechless, trying to understand what had just happened. Why was he acting like this? "Marcus, what is that?" she asked again, her eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" But Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he yanked her away from the strange object and back down the path toward the cabin. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a sliver of light in the sky. Jasmine was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the blood rushing to her ears, a dull ringing growing louder with each step. She didn't understand. Why was Marcus so terrified of that shirt? What was he hiding? As the door to the cabin slammed shut behind them, Jasmine turned to face him, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "What is going on, Marcus? Why won't you tell me the truth?" For the first time since they arrived, Marcus's eyes flickered. But it wasn't relief that she saw. It was something far darker, something cold. "You don't need to know," he said, his voice steady but unyielding. "You don't need to know anything about that." Jasmine recoiled, the weight of his words crushing her. And then, like a thunderclap, the realization hit her. This was no ordinary anniversary trip. Something had gone terribly wrong, and she had been walking into a trap all along. Jasmine was beginning to see the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but the picture they formed was one she never expected. She was no longer just a woman looking for answers. She was now a part of something much darker than she could ever have imagined. The sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the cabin in an eerie, suffocating darkness. Jasmine's mind raced with questions that refused to settle. What had happened out there in the woods? Why was Marcus acting so strange? And what was that torn, bloody shirt? I know him better than this, Jasmine thought desperately, her heart pounding in her chest. He wouldn't lie to me, would he? She sat on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her as she stared into the cold fireplace. The flames flickered weakly, casting distorted shadows on the wooden walls. The silence in the cabin was thick, almost oppressive. The air felt too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Marcus was in the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. She could hear him pacing, his footsteps slow and deliberate. It was as if he was fighting with himself, his mind wrestling with his emotions. Jasmine's stomach churned at the thought. Was he about to break? Jasmine stood up, her movements quiet but purposeful. The heavy weight of her unease had reached a tipping point. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to know the truth. She had to confront him. She pushed the bedroom door open without knocking. Marcus was standing by the window, his back to her. The moonlight filtered through the glass, casting his shadow across the floor. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, tell me what's going on." He didn't turn around at first. He simply stood there, motionless. The seconds stretched, thick and unbearable. And then, with a sigh, he spoke. "I didn't want you to find out this way." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. His words were clipped, filled with a strange kind of resignation. For a moment, She thought he might finally tell her everything, but instead, he turned to face her, his eyes hollow. "I've been hiding things from you, Jasmine, and I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What was he saying? "Why?" she asked finally, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you just tell me? Where are you hiding?" His face, usually so familiar, now seemed foreign to her, cold, distant, full of secrets. It was never supposed to get this bad. We were supposed to be happy, Jasmine. This was supposed to be a new start. But he stopped himself, clenching his fists at his sides. "I never wanted you to be involved in this," he continued. "I never wanted to drag you into something that's not yours." Jasmine took a step forward, her pulse racing. "What's not mine, Marcus? What the hell are you talking about?" For a moment, the room fell into another stretch of silence. Jasmine's mind raced. What could possibly be so bad that he couldn't tell her? Marcus finally lowered his head, his shoulders sagging. "It's not just about us anymore. It never was." He paused, his voice low, almost ashamed. "Jasmine, I owe money. A lot of money. And I made some very bad choices to try to fix it. It started small, loans from the wrong people, but got out of hand, much faster than I thought it would." Jasmine blinked, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Loans? What do you mean? Who? People who don't care about consequences," Marcus interrupted, cutting her off. "People who deal in ways you wouldn't understand." His eyes met hers, and there was a pain in them that almost broke her heart. He looked like a man who had been running from a storm for too long, only now realizing that the storm was closing in on him. The tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she held them back, forcing herself to stay composed. "Who are they, Marcus? What do they want from you? What are you involved in?" "Jasmine," Marcus's voice trailed off. "I didn't think they would come after you. I didn't think you'd have to get involved. But last night, when you heard that noise outside, it wasn't just an animal. It was them. They've been watching us, waiting. And now," he stopped, a look of terror crossing his face. "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Jasmine demanded, her voice rising. She was trembling now, fear creeping in, coiling tighter around her. "They're coming for us, Jasmine. They've been following us since we left the city. And He ran a hand through his hair, his face twisted in agony. "I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I can't protect you anymore." Jasmine's world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her mind whirled. She couldn't process the weight of Marcus's words. The man she had loved for so long was admitting to being tangled in something far worse than anything she could imagine. The sound of a door creaking open from outside broke the silence between them. Jasmine froze. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the porch, growing louder. "Marcus, who's out there?" Jasmine whispered, barely able to keep the fear out of her voice. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, his eyes went wide, and he rushed to the door, locking it quickly. His movements were frantic now, desperate. "We're not alone anymore," he said, his voice shaking. "They've found us." Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door, followed by a low voice, deep, threatening. "You've been running long enough, Marcus." The voice sent a chill down Jasmine's spine. She took a step back, her pulse hammering in her ears. Marcus didn't move. He didn't even blink. His face had gone pale, his hands trembling as he gripped the doorframe. Jasmine felt her knees go weak. The room seemed to close in around her as the realization hit. They weren't just on a trip to celebrate their anniversary. They were in the midst of a nightmare, one that neither of them could wake up from. Jasmine is now confronted with the truth of Marcus's dangerous involvement in a criminal web, and the stakes have never been higher. As the mysterious figures on the other side of the door begin to close in, Jasmine realizes that the nightmare is just beginning. Will they escape? Or will this anniversary trip become their final destination? The knock on the door was steady, deliberate, and relentless. It was the kind of sound that made your heart stop, the kind that shook you to your core, as though it were a warning. Jasmine stood frozen in place, her mind racing. her body caught in a mix of dread and disbelief. The realization that Marcus's secrets had finally caught up with them was almost too much to bear. Marcus, his face ashen, didn't move from his position by the door. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his chest heaving as if he were suffocating. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, crushing him with every passing second. Jasmine's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of the world. "Who are they, Marcus? Who's at the door?" His eyes flickered briefly to her, but he didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the door, his expression hardening with each second that ticked by. "I didn't want this," he muttered under his breath, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I didn't want you to be part of this, but now it's too late." Jasmine could barely hear him over the thumping of her own heartbeat. The air in the cabin had thickened, suffocating her. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow as she struggled to process what was happening. Was this the same man she had married? The man who promised her safety, love, and a life of shared dreams? Was he capable of betraying her like this? The knock came again, louder this time. "You're out of time, Marcus," the voice outside said, low and chilling. "Open up." Jasmine's pulse quickened. She could feel her legs weakening beneath her, a panic rising like a tidal wave, threatening to crash over her. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as it reached for Marcus's arm. "Marcus, please," she pleaded. "What have you done? What are they going to do to us?" For a long moment, he didn't respond. His jaw tightened, his eyes distant, as if he were grappling with some unspoken truth. Finally, he turned to face her. His expression was tortured, but there was something else there, too. Something darker, something resigned. "Jasmine, listen to me. They're not here for you," he said in a low, strained voice. "They're here for me. They've been following me for months, and now that they've found us, they won't stop until they get what they came for." Jasmine's stomach twisted with fear and confusion. "What do they want from you?" "They want me to pay for what I've done," he replied quietly, his eyes darkening. "They'll stop at nothing to get their money back." Outside the cabin, the air was still. The moon was high, casting an eerie glow over the woods, but it felt like the world had paused, holding its breath. The silence between each knock seemed to stretch on forever, making it impossible to predict what would happen next. Jasmine could hear nothing but the pounding of her own pulse in her ears, the shiver that ran down her spine like a chill. She took a step back, feeling the weight of the words hanging in the air. "What did you do, Marcus?" Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Who are they? Who are these people you owe?" Marcus's gaze shifted to the floor. He seemed almost ashamed. "They're dangerous," he whispered. "I got involved with the wrong crowd, loan sharks, underground money dealers. I thought I could pay them back on my own, but I couldn't. They'll do anything to get their money. Anything." Jasmine felt as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. How could he keep this from me? How could he keep me in the dark while living in this world of lies and danger? She had married him in trust and love. This man, the one who had been so gentle with her, had lied. He had lied in the most unimaginable way. The knock on the door came again, harder this time. "We know you're in there, Marcus," the voice called, louder now, impatient, menacing. "Open the door. Now." Jasmine turned to the door, her mind spiraling. Was there a way out of this? Could they escape? She glanced at Marcus, desperate for some kind of reassurance, but he was already moving toward the door, the look in his eyes now cold and resigned. "No," he muttered. "It's too late to run. We'll have to face them." With a trembling hand, he reached for the door, unlocking it slowly, the metallic click echoing through the cabin like a death sentence. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She stepped back, trying to make sense of the nightmare she was trapped in. The door creaked open, revealing the shadows of two men standing outside. They were tall, broad-shouldered, their faces obscured by the dim light of the night. One of them had a scar running down his cheek, a visible reminder of the danger he carried. The other, more composed, stood with his arms crossed, a faint smirk on his lips. Both men exuded an air of quiet menace, their eyes cold and calculating. "Marcus," the scarred man said, his voice low and gravelly. "You've made us wait long enough." Jasmine's pulse pounded in her ears. She stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. It was as though her voice had been stolen from her. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in on her. Marcus stepped forward, his hand clenched into a fist at his side. "I don't have the money. You'll have to take it up with the bank." The smirk on the second man's face faded. "You think we don't know about the bank? You think we're here for some paperwork?" Jasmine's stomach dropped. The tone in the man's voice was chilling. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here for something much darker. The scarred man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Marcus. "You didn't just steal from us, Marcus. You made promises. You lied to the wrong people." Jasmine's mind raced. She turned to Marcus, a question forming in her mind. What do they mean by promises? Her voice was shaking. Marcus didn't answer. He only looked at her, his face betraying the weight of what had happened, of the mess he had dragged them both into. And then, the man with the smirk stepped closer to Jasmine, his eyes taking in her every move. "But I'll tell you what," he said with a chilling grin. "We could be persuaded to forget about the debt, if you're willing to make a trade." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of trade?" The man's eyes gleamed with malice. "All in good time, sweetheart." Jasmine's worst fears are confirmed as the men reveal their true intentions. The stakes are raised as they suggest a trade that threatens everything Jasmine holds dear. With the danger closing in, will Marcus finally take responsibility for the consequences of his actions, or will it be too late for them both? The air in the cabin was thick with tension, thick enough that Jasmine could barely breathe. She stared at the two men outside the door, her heart racing in her chest. The words they spoke, the trade they were offering, hung in the air, so heavy it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in. "Trade," Jasmine whispered, her voice barely audible. The thought of what they were implying was too monstrous to fathom, yet the expression on the men's faces made it clear. They weren't joking. The scarred man, his eyes cold and calculating, took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Jasmine. The smirk on the second man's lips deepened, his stance predatory. "You've been dragged into something bigger than you, sweetheart," the second man said, his tone smooth, almost seductive. "We're not interested in hurting you, at least, not if we don't have to." Jasmine's pulse quickened. She felt like a rat in a trap, surrounded by predators with no way out. What did they want? What were they willing to take from her? "I don't understand," Jasmine managed to say, her voice trembling as she tried to piece together the nightmare she was trapped in. "What do you want from me?" The scarred man chuckled darkly. "It's simple. Your husband owes us a debt that goes beyond money. But we're willing to forget about it, if you're willing to make a little sacrifice." Jasmine's eyes flickered to Marcus. He was standing there, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides. He hadn't moved. He hadn't said anything. The look in his eyes was a mixture of guilt and despair. "You don't have to do this, Jasmine," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "Please, just walk away. I'll handle this. It's my mess, and I'll make it right. But you don't need to be a part of it." But Jasmine wasn't listening to him anymore. The gravity of what was unfolding was too overwhelming, too terrifying. Her mind raced, trying to process it all. They weren't just talking about money. They weren't here for a loan repayment. Jasmine realized that these men weren't the kind of people who let things slide. No, they were here to claim something far more valuable. Her. The scarred man stepped forward, his eyes locking with Jasmine's, his gaze icy cold. "You see, Jasmine, your husband doesn't understand the concept of debt. It's not just money we want, it's power, control. And that's what we're offering. In exchange for your husband's debt, we'll take something much more valuable." Jasmine's throat tightened. "What do you mean? What could you possibly want from me?" Her voice was desperate, but the fear that curled in her stomach was almost unbearable. The man's grin grew wider. "We'll take you," he said, his voice low, almost coaxing. "As long as you give us what we need. Your soul, your silence. All we want is your complete submission. and your husband's debt is paid in full." Jasmine felt her blood run cold, her legs trembling beneath her. The implication of their words hit her like a slap in the face. It wasn't a metaphor. They were speaking literally. Her soul. They wanted her. Jasmine turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Marcus, what did you get us into? What did you do?" Marcus flinched, his face twisted in regret, his jaw clenched in self-loathing. "I never meant for this to happen, Jasmine. I swear, I didn't know they would come for you. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could fix it myself. But now," he paused, his voice breaking, "now they want you, and there's nothing I can do to stop them." Jasmine's chest tightened with a mix of rage and heartbreak. This was all because of him. The man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, had dragged her into this nightmare, and now he couldn't protect her. Her thoughts raced as she struggled to take it all in. What kind of people were they? What kind of choice did she have? "You have until sunrise," the second man said, his voice sharp. "If you're not willing to make the trade, well, let's just say your husband will never see another day. And neither will you." The weight of the words hit her with brutal finality. Jasmine's heart hammered in her chest, each beat feeling like a countdown to some inevitable end. But there was one thing that stood out more than anything in that moment. One thing that kept her moving, that kept her mind from snapping entirely. She wasn't going down without a fight. She turned to Marcus, her eyes blazing with a quiet fury. "I'm not going to let them take me," she whispered, her voice hard with resolve. "You've dragged me into this mess, and now we'll find a way out together." Marcus's face crumpled, and for the first time since the moment they arrived, she saw him for what he truly was. A man broken by his own choices. The man who had made a deal with the devil, now powerless to undo it. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked older than she had ever seen him. "I'm sorry, Jasmine. I didn't want this. I thought I could keep you safe." His voice cracked, full of guilt and fear. Jasmine didn't respond. She couldn't. The weight of his apology meant nothing now. What mattered was survival. She couldn't trust him anymore, not when he had put her in this situation. There was one thing left to do. As the men waited outside, a dark promise hanging in the air, Jasmine's mind worked furiously, desperately looking for a way out. She couldn't just give in to them. She couldn't. She looked around the cabin, searching for anything that could help. Her eyes fell on the fireplace, the carving knife that had been placed carelessly on the mantel. The knife. It was her only option now. "I'll do it," Jasmine said suddenly, her voice strong, though her insides were shaking. "I'll make the trade." Marcus's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. "No, Jasmine, you don't have to do this." But Jasmine silenced him with a look. She had made her decision. As the men outside waited in silence, Jasmine turned her back on Marcus, her fingers gripping the carving knife tightly. Her hands were steady, even as her heart raced in her chest. She would do whatever it took to survive, whatever it took to protect herself. But her decision wasn't one of submission. No, it was a game of deception. She would make them believe they had won, only to turn the tables when the moment was right. Jasmine's final choice to make the trade is just the beginning of her plan to outsmart the men who have come to claim her. The knife may be her weapon, but her mind is the sharpest tool she has. As the night draws on, will her deception work, or has she sealed her fate? The clock was ticking. Every second that passed felt like a slow death, and Jasmine could feel the weight of time pressing down on her chest. Outside, the men stood waiting, their voices muffled by the thick wood of the cabin's walls. The air was heavy with tension, thick enough to drown a person. Jasmine's grip on the carving knife tightened, her knuckles white. She could feel the cold steel beneath her fingers, steady and sharp, the only thing standing between her and the nightmare that was waiting outside. The plan had to work. There was no other choice. She had to outsmart them. Marcus, still standing frozen by the door, was silent, his eyes wide with fear. He had watched his wife prepare to make the most dangerous decision of her life, and all he could do was stand there helpless, unable to protect her. "Jasmine, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm the one they want, not you." But Jasmine didn't answer him. She couldn't. The words she needed to say had already been lost to the darkness between them. She couldn't trust him anymore. Not when he had led her into this trap. Not when he had put her in a position where she had to make a choice between survival and submission. She had learned too much about him. Too much about the lies he had buried deep inside. To go back to the woman she had once been. The woman who believed in trust and love above all else. The woman who had loved him. Jasmine stood at the door, the knife now held firmly in her hand, hidden by the hem of her dress. She had already made her decision. She would play their game, make them believe she was submitting, that she would offer herself as payment for her husband's mistakes. She would lead them into thinking they had won. But she wasn't just going to give in. "Marcus, open the door," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that clawed at her insides. "Let them in. It's time." Marcus hesitated, his hand on the doorknob, his face pale. "Jasmine, do it," she snapped, her voice sharp. The time for hesitation had passed. With a deep breath, Marcus turned the knob and pulled the door open. The two men stood there, their eyes gleaming with hunger, with victory. They stepped forward, entering the cabin with the confidence of those who knew they had already won. But Jasmine wasn't fooled. The game was still in play. The scarred man sneered at Marcus, his eyes shifting to Jasmine with a predatory glint. "Ready to make your sacrifice, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice low and mocking. Jasmine took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing. "I'm ready," she said, her voice cold and controlled. The man grinned, stepping forward to take her arm. "Good. That's what we like to hear." But as his hand reached for her, Jasmine acted. She moved with lightning speed, spinning around and thrusting the knife deep into his side before he could react. The man gasped, his eyes wide with shock as the blade cut through his ribs. The second man lunged at her, but Marcus, finally finding the strength to act, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy iron candle holder, and swung it at the other man's head. The force of the blow knocked the man off balance, and before he could recover, Marcus struck again, landing a second blow that sent the man crashing to the floor. The room was filled with chaos, the tension finally boiling over. Jasmine, breathing hard, turned to Marcus, her heart pounding in her chest. "Get the door. Lock it. Now." Marcus, his face pale but determined, rushed to the door, slamming it shut and locking it. The two men, both injured but not dead, were down, but they weren't out. Not yet. Jasmine and Marcus stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in unison. The silence that followed was deafening. The men outside would recover. They would be back. Jasmine knew that. But in that moment, she understood something vital. There was no running from the choices they had made. There was no escape from the consequences of betrayal, of lies, of trust broken. But there was one thing they still had: their lives. "We have to leave," Jasmine said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "Now." Marcus nodded, his face filled with both relief and guilt. "Where do we go? What do we do now?" Jasmine didn't answer. There was no answer to that. They had no plan, no way of knowing what would happen next. But one thing was clear: they had survived the night, and that at least was something. As the story comes to a close, Jasmine and Marcus are left in the aftermath of their choices. Their lives will never be the same. What had started as a romantic getaway, a simple anniversary trip, had turned into a fight for survival, a test of trust, a test of resilience. Jasmine's journey wasn't just one of survival. It was one of awakening, of understanding the harsh truths that lay beneath the surface, of recognizing that even love can be corrupted by betrayal. She had learned that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. But even in the face of betrayal, we always have a choice. We can either succumb to the darkness, or we can fight, no matter the cost. This story teaches us that we cannot control the actions of others, but we can control how we respond. Life may throw us into difficult situations, and sometimes we're forced to make choices we never thought we'd face. But in those moments, we find our true strength. We find out who we really are. Never let betrayal define you. Never let anyone take away your power to choose your own destiny. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to face betrayal? How did you overcome it? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. We have many more gripping tales waiting to be told. Stories that will challenge your beliefs, your emotions, and your view of the world. Join us on this journey.